Maxwell's does this thing with the light, soft, flattering, like it forgives everyone for what they're about to say. White tablecloths, the clink of polished glass, servers who remember your preferred water like it's a resume line. Not the kind of place where you end a man's decade, which is precisely why Callum chose it. Optics. Always optics. Ethan, you've been invaluable, he said, cutting into a steak that bled like good manners. But we're going in a different direction. He let the phrase lounge there, the way executives do when they've rehearsed until the syllables feel merciful. I smiled, said the line I knew he wanted to hear. These things happen. Calm voice. Napkin folded like a truce. No one at that table understood that I had already grieved this moment months ago. I'd known since the first hairline crack, small, unauthorized pings in the server logs, off hours, from an IP block that lived on the executive floor. The kind of curious fingers that don't belong in systems you're not supposed to know exist. Documentation libraries, contingency maps, the quiet scaffolding that keeps a manufacturer breathing at 2 a.m. when a spindle misbehaves. Someone had been reading me, not to learn from me, but to mine me. My nephew Aiden just finished at MIT. Callum added, carving optimism out of protein. Digital transformation. Brilliant kid. Direction, meet bloodline. Milwaukee is a practical city. Machines don't stop, and neither did I for 11 years. I built Riverton's bones while the world still taped passwords under keyboards, and our servers wore the tired face of Windows XP. What began as a stopgap, post-divorce drift, a couch in a brother's spare room, hardened into a spine. 5 people at a help desk turned into 30, 3 plants humming through snowstorms and heat waves because we taught metal to listen. Who's handling the transition? I asked, the way you ask about whether you've already checked. Relief flashed across his face when I didn't make a scene. You'll have 6 weeks, he said. Announcement after the quarterly all hands. He slid an NDA toward me before dessert. The paper was warm from his briefcase, or maybe from the room. Either way, I signed. I've learned that sometimes the most strategic thing in a knife fight is to put your hands in your pockets and wait. Back at my desk, the screen told the truth. My admin role quietly demoted. My name missing from the leadership thread. Decisions made before lunch, probably before the consultant with the bland tie asked me kindergarten questions about an architecture I'd written half asleep over black coffee and freighted worry. Appearances live at Maxwell's, outcomes live and permissions. That night, sleep came in fragments, thin ice over deep water. Not fear, not even anger, though it simmered like a low-grade fever. What kept me pacing was the math, the logs from 3 months ago, the pattern of probing from up high, the tidy way my pathways had been studied. They weren't just replacing me. They were extracting the map first, the way you study the locks before you change the guard. I stood at the window and watched the city stack its lights like code, order imposed on dark. Somewhere, a snowplow groaned down an artery, doing its small, precise work so morning can happen. I thought about how often we tell ourselves we're temporary, just passing through, until the thing we build begins to claim us back. Networks do that. So do marriages. So do lives. Callum would say later that business is business, that companies evolve. He'd be right, in the way that statistics are right, and still miss the face behind the number. The truth is simpler. Value has a pulse. You feel it when a production line doesn't die at midnight because a buried process reroutes power like a parent calming a feverish child. You feel it when a team learns to read the hum of servers as if it were language. The city exhaled. I sat down, opened the logs again, moved slowly, like a diver. If they wanted a different direction, fine. But directions have coordinates, and I knew every one of them by heart. Milwaukee wasn't the plan. Plans are tidy, and life kept knocking coffee into mine. I followed Nora here 16 years ago, back when marriage felt like a horizon instead of a mirror. She had a graduate program and a map with circles and arrows. I had a job in Minneapolis that looked respectable on paper and paper thin in the heart. We traded skylines for lake wind and bratwurst stands, told ourselves we'd build a life out of small rituals, Sunday groceries, a wobbly table rescued from a curb, the sort of laughter people mistake for certainty. The divorce arrived like an email you reread 3 times and still can't parse. No slammed doors, no dramatic inventory. Just a sentence that rearranged the furniture in my head. We want different things. I left quietly, took the couch at my brother's place, Learned again how sound carries in small homes. The kettle, the stair creaks, the consolation of normalcy. There's a particular humility in folding your suits into a duffel and pretending it's an adventure. Riverton found me because disaster is honest. A ransomware attack had crawled through their brittle systems, and the factory floor, with its ancient controllers and jittery networks, had gone still. Manufacturing has a heartbeat. Machines, sure, but also schedules, supply chains, the choreography of union shifts and third-shift coffee. When the beat stops, families notice. Mortgages notice. The Midwest talks about work the way coastal people talk about weather. Here, reliability is a love language. They wanted a patch. I saw a spine. I pitched Callum a 5-year overhaul like a sermon. Segment the networks, bury redundancy in places no one would think to look, train the help desk to be the first orchestra, not the last resort. I wanted backups that weren't just mirrors but memories, snapshots of a system's good days, so we could teach it to find its way back when it got lost. Maybe I needed the same thing. The budget came with guardrails and wary eyes. I kept office hours like I owed someone an apology, stayed for the cleaning crew and the shift change, and the way fluorescent light makes your skin admit its exhaustion. We turned a 5-person desk into a unit of 30 who could translate between machine and human at 3 a.m. We built runbooks that read less like manuals and more like field notes from a stubborn landscape. I watched apprentices become experts, watched experts become teachers. In the break room, quiet people became loud when talking about uptime, and loud people learned to whisper when the floor supervisor called. Priya arrived with a notebook full of squares and arrows, the kind that meant the thinking had already happened before the meeting. She was the first to ask why our alerts didn't speak in verbs. Tell me what to do, not just what's wrong, she said, and I changed the way we wrote notifications that afternoon. Marco could coax order out of chaos, fingers flying, jaw set, a softness in him that only showed up when he fixed what everyone else had given up on. The three of us built a small republic inside the company. Rules, language, a belief that resilience isn't a feature but a practice. In year 3, when the Northeast blackout rolled through like a weathered lesson, our plant stayed lit. Not bravado, just layers. Diesel hum on the roof, clean failovers, a mesh of tiny choices made on unglamorous days. The board noticed because clients did. A contract doesn't care about heroics, only deadlines met in February. After that, Callum brought me into rooms with windows that didn't open and catered sandwiches arranged like apologies. Budgets expanded. We hired. The help desk became a nerve center. People from the floor started dropping by just to tell us when a machine sounded different. And we logged those stories like data because in the Midwest, memory is also a tool. Somewhere in there, the temporary job became a shape that fit me. Not legally mine, but owned in all the ways that make leaving feel like theft. I taught the network to breathe under pressure, and it taught me to sleep again, 1 hour at a time. I told myself I'd stay until it could walk without me. Then the walking became running, and I forgot to plan an exit because the work felt like a promise kept, to the city, to the night shift, to the person I was trying to become after Nora. On good nights, I'd stand in the server room and listen to the hum the way people listen to rain, steady, indifferent, faithful. We were a factory that made things you could hold, but the real product was trust. You can't list that on a quarterly report. You feel it when a line worker nods at you in the parking lot like you kept a quiet promise. That nod is a contract. I signed 1,000 of them without a pen. The first erase wasn't loud. It arrived with a visitor's badge and an apologetic smile. A consultant with a tidy haircut and a pen that clicked too often. He said he was auditing our digital posture. Asked me about VLANs like they were new inventions. Nodded at diagrams I'd drawn 5 winters ago. I answered, measured, and waited for the real question. It never came. He left with copies of what anyone competent could have learned in a week on the floor. Surface knowledge. Enough for a slide deck. Not enough to keep the night shift safe. 2 days later, a shared drive folder blinked out of existence. Board minutes I'd always had access to. Server cleanup. The notice read, a phrase that covers a multitude of sins. I pinged the admin channel. Got polite shrugs. That afternoon, Callum had to move our weekly for the 3rd time. Each cancellation wore a sensible reason. Travel. Investor call. A last-minute client demo. I told myself to be generous. When people show you their calendar, they're telling you where your name belongs. In December, we dressed in resort casual for the leadership retreat and listened to strangers talk about culture like it was a subscription box. There were sessions on narrative alignment and friction as fuel. Good phrases, easy to print on mugs. At the bar, I overheard Martin bragging about his nephew. Aiden's finishing at MIT, he said, pride high in his throat. Silicon Valley is circling. I thought about the consultant's kindergarten questions, about the missing minutes. I finished my club soda, told myself the Midwest rule, don't borrow, worry. January brought weather that tested doors and tempers. Priya dropped into my office, shut the door with her hip. I was invited to a strategic planning session, she said, voice flat. You weren't on the invite. She lifted an eyebrow. I asked why. They changed the subject. She's not prone to drama. She saves adjectives for code reviews. The room felt smaller. I checked my email again, as if the invite might materialize if I stared hard enough. Nothing. The consultant returned, this time with a younger colleague who called our monitoring stack legacy before opening a single dashboard. I watched the way he pointed, the way Aiden would point later, at structure like it was merely scaffolding to be swapped out for trendier steel. Legacy is a word people use when they want your results without having to respect your reasons. I measured the distance between what was said and what was done. Lunches canceled, documents removed, meetings rebranded without me. The company still smiled at me in hallways. People still asked about their VPNs and printers, and in the same breath, how I was sleeping. The floor knew. The floor always knows. In factories, rumors travel through the ductwork. They lodge where warm air slows. They collect and gather weight. I told myself loyalty is a kind of wisdom, that staying steady while the picture blurs is a way to serve. Nora used to say I made altars out of duty. She wasn't wrong. But duty is also a way to breathe when the room tilts. I kept doing the rounds. Walked the lines. Let supervisors vent about parts and budgets in winter. Wrote another checklist, not because it would save me, but because it might save an hour at 2 a.m. for someone whose kid had a dentist appointment in the morning. One night, late, I sat with Priya by the window overlooking the loading dock. Snow turned the sodium light to a soft theater. She tapped a finger on the glass. It feels like they're planning around you, she said. Not against. Around. The preposition matters. It means the decision is already made. The conversation is just set dressing. I nodded. People in power prefer the word process. Gravity prefers truth. At home, the radiator clanged like a tired metronome. I made tea. Opened the logs. The executive floor IP was quieter now, which told me the copying was complete. When hunters stop rustling, it means they're already in position. I printed 2 pages, timestamps, access trails, and slid them into a file with a name that would not invite curiosity. Then I closed my eyes and did a small Midwestern prayer. Show up on time. Help your people. Keep your receipts. The slow erase continued, polite as ever. And yet, under it, something steady in me stayed lit. Not anger. Not yet. Something like a carpenter's pencil line. Faint. Precise. A mark you can cut to without rushing the blade. The server room has its own weather. Dry. Cool. A wind made by fans and purpose. When the door seals, the outside world goes soft, like sound is a coat you can shrug off. I've always liked that. Machines don't play politics. They tell you what they need, power, airflow, patches, then hold up their end if you hold up yours. I was tracing a noise through the racks, palm resting on the bezel of a chassis the way you put a hand to a sleeping child's back, when the door opened and let in a different climate. Polished shoes. Citrus cologne. A pause long enough to decide on a smile. Evening, he said, leaning in the doorway like it was a podium. Clean haircut, expensive watch, the easy balance of someone who expects the floor to be level. I'm Aiden. I kept my hands where they were. Routine checks. The old joke rose and I let it pass. You need anything? Just getting the lay of the land. He stepped in, eyes sweeping the rows. He didn't ask if he could enter. People who have always had keys don't practice asking. Impressive setup, he said. A bit old school, but solid. Old school. I looked at the cabinets that had been gutted and modernized 8 months back. New fabrics beneath familiar jackets. There are 2 kinds of readers in this world. Those who only notice the font, and those who notice the edits. Solid keeps the night shift paid, I said lightly. He crouched to scan a label, then stood. Your documentation is thorough. The compliment came pre-packaged, like a hotel breakfast. I've been reading your protocols. I have some ideas for modernization. He said it as if he were offering to upgrade my shoes. I nodded at the floor tile between us, looking forward to hearing them. The words tasted like chalk, but I swallowed. He smiled, the way people smile at cameras and mirrors. Callum mentioned you'd be walking me through the transition. He glanced at the temperature readout. The confidence never flickered. See you around, Ethan. When the door closed, the room felt honest again. I sat at my station and pulled the logs like a string through cloth. There it was, an account spun up 3 weeks before the Maxwell's lunch. Top-level admin reads across the library. My contingencies, my runbooks, my quiet corners. He had been studying the house by flashlight while I was still sleeping in it. I checked the change management queue. Several tickets marked executive request, vague as perfume. Aiden had already left half a dozen comments like notes in a margin, circling phrases he'd later call legacy, suggesting streamlines to places that only look tangled if you ignore the terrain. I felt a muscle near my eye jump and told it to stand down. I texted Marco Joe's. 6:30. He sent a thumbs up and then, a minute later, a dot that blinked and disappeared. I understood. Everyone was suddenly auditioning for a role they hadn't asked to play. Work ended itself by degrees. When the last shift changed over, I walked to the lot, sat in the car, and waited until the steering wheel felt like a door handle. The lake pulls you when you need rinsing. I drove there on streets that remember snow even in March, parked where Nora and I used to watch the sky, make promises it couldn't keep. The water was black and disciplined. I rolled down the window and let winter do what it does, strip a thing down until its lines are visible. There's a Midwestern habit of putting feelings into work until they quiet. I listened to the dark hum from the plants upriver, thought about duty and design, about how the most reliable systems are never the most fashionable. Somewhere a freight horn made a long, low sentence. I answered it by counting the ways you can lose something and still keep its shape in your hands. I told myself 2 truths out loud, just to hear them. First, I won't sabotage what feeds families I'll never meet. Second, I won't give away what I built before this place knew my name. The air made both sentences visible. On the way home, I pictured Aiden's watch reflecting server lights, the way bright things borrow shine. I pictured my own hands, the little scars from rack ears in winter. I let the math settle. 3 weeks head start, a handful of executive signatures, and me, still here, still quiet, still counting. Tomorrow, coffee. Then calculus. Then consequences. When I reached my door, the city had tucked itself in. I stood a minute longer, listening for that thin internal click when a plan locks into place. It came. Not a bang, not a drum roll. Just the sound a drawer makes when it closes cleanly. Joe's opens before the sun admits defeat. The bell over the door gives a small, kind sound, and the air smells like the beginning of second chances, burnt edges of espresso, cinnamon trying its best. Marco was already there, hands around a paper cup, dark crescents under his eyes like he'd been reading through the night. He looked up with that apology men carry when they've been made to choose between loyalty and a mortgage. "They're phasing you out," he said, no preamble, just mercy. I nodded. We let the hiss of the steamer fill the space where anger might have taken a chair. "They've been asking me weird questions," he continued, voice low. "Not how, but how fast. If Ethan wasn't here, could we?" As if the systems were a trick you do once and clap for. "When did it start?" "A couple weeks ago. Maybe 3. His thumb worried the seam of the cup. "I should have told you." You have kids," I said. "A roof that expects the heat to work. No apology necessary." He looked relieved and also not. There's a specific grief in admitting you saw the wave coming and did not shout. We sat with it, 2 men who had kept factories breathing at midnight and now had to name a different kind of emergency. "What's your plan?" Marco asked finally. I surprised myself by already having one. Or maybe it had been writing itself in the margins of my days for months. "They think everything is in the documentation," I said. "But we both know it isn't." He leaned in. "The patches, the adapters, the invisible glue." I nodded. "The parts of SystemSync I built before Riverton. The interface that lets old controllers speak to new nerves. The monitoring language Priya pushed me to make. Alerts that don't just scream, but suggest." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "I won't sabotage. I won't let a single paycheck go hungry because I wanted to teach someone a lesson." but I won't give away what's mine. He studied my face like he was checking a checksum. So where's the line? Here, I said, tapping the table. Everything I made on my own time before I ever touched Riverton's network. The core of SystemSync, my original repo, my pre-hire notes, the shim logic that bridges the antique PLCs to modern telemetry, and the craft that never made it into a wiki, the night shift instincts, the vendor quirks, the human map of who to call when line 2 sings a different note at peak load. You'll need receipts, he said. I have them. I'll need better ones. I reached into my coat and pulled a small notebook, graph paper, edges curled. I flipped to a page titled Inventory, underlined twice. Original codebase, pre-employment timestamp. Early emails with Callum where he called SystemSync your tool and promised to formalize terms. Changelogs that show the trunk is mine, even if the branches grew here. Marco angled the notebook closer. What do you need from me? Copies of anything I authored that never entered their official pipeline. Deployment logs where my signature keys appear. Not to weaponize. To prove provenance. I paused. And names. Names. Who still believes this is a team, not a throne room? He gave me 3. Priya, of course. Rayon Knights, who fixes both forklifts and feelings. Lila from QA, who keeps a ledger of near misses like a rosary. People who understand that reliability is a communal verb. The barista set 2 plates in front of us. Muffins, generous with blueberries. The kind of kindness that keeps small places alive. We ate like the hungry do, efficiently grateful. Outside, commuters pulled their coats tighter and rehearsed their polite faces for the day. There's another piece, I said. I'm filing provisional patents on the adapters, the handshake protocols. Not to shut anyone out. To make the boundary visible. Clean, not petty, Marco said. He liked the word clean. So did I. We'll set up a secure offsite, I added. Mirror the originals. Encrypt, log, notarize the timestamps. A quiet island away from their storm. He pushed his cup aside. I'll pull what I can tonight. Careful footprints. He hesitated. Aiden's been meeting people one-on-one, asking if you made things harder than they had to be. I smiled without humor. Fashion and safety rarely share a runway. We stood. He gripped my shoulder, a small contract signed in a public place. On my way out, I slid a folded envelope to him. Names, instructions, a map if the week went sideways. For Priya if it gets strange, I said. It's already strange, he replied gently. Then for when it gets honest, I said. The bell sang again as the door opened to morning. The air bit my face awake. I walked toward the day with a list in my pocket and a line I would not cross. The all-hands took place in the auditorium that smells like coffee and varnish, where birthdays and safety milestones get equal applause. Screens glowed with a slide that said future in a font that tries too hard. Callum stood beneath the lights, tie the color of authority, and delivered a speech polished to a friendly shine. Change is opportunity, he said. Fresh perspectives. He spoke in plurals, a trick that makes hard things sound like potlucks. Aiden stood just off-center, hands folded, the smile of a man who's had time to practice. My name arrived midway through, framed by gratitude and past tense. Ethan has been instrumental in building our IT backbone, Callum said, eyes skating past me like a stone across a lake. He'll help us transition leadership to Aiden over the next 6 weeks. A low ripple went through the room. Chairs shifting, a cough that meant disbelief. Priya found my eyes from 3 rows back. I gave her the smallest nod. We rehearse our bravery in signals. Afterward, I asked for a meeting. Callum, HR, a table large enough to spread the facts. Claire from HR had the kind voice you use for splinters. She slid a copy of my employment agreement across the wood. Anything developed during your tenure is company property, she said, the sentence smoothed by repetition. I tapped a clause I had memorized the week I signed it. SystemSync predates my Riverton tenure, I said. 10 months of design and code. The integration was licensed, not sold. We discussed formalizing ownership in email. I kept my tone even. Calm as an argument with proof. Callum leaned back. That was a decade ago, he said. The system has evolved here. He wasn't wrong. Branches had grown, many by hands I trained. But trunks tell the age of trees. And evolution doesn't erase origin, I replied. I'm not asking to dismantle anything. I'm asking for proper recognition and compensation for the licensed core. Claire's pen paused above her pad. We'll review, she said, which is corporate for later. We shook hands with the kind of warmth a hospital uses for discharge. I learned about Aiden's team meeting from an invitation that forgot to exclude me. I went anyway. He had a whiteboard crowded with arrows pointing to the word streamline. He spoke about simplification like it was oxygen. These protocols are overly complex, he said, chin up. Modern systems don't require so many safeguards. He was addressing the room, but aiming at me. I leaned against the doorframe, let the hum of the HVAC keep time. Which protocols? I asked. The production floor paths, he said. We'll remove redundant checks. Those redundancies keep line 2 from tearing itself to bolts at peak load, I said. I didn't raise my voice. Priya cut in, steady. 2018, she said. The spindle surge. The redundant check caught it. Saved 4 hours and a worker's wrist. Silence drew neat edges around her words. Aiden's smile thinned, then returned, smaller. Appreciate the context, he said, turning back to the board. We're still moving forward. That afternoon, legal wrote in a tone that mistook me for tired. They asserted full ownership of all integrated technologies, cited a clause about incorporation, and offered me a technology acquisition bonus of $5,000. The number sat in my inbox like a joke told in bad weather. I replied with receipts, dates, hashes, the original repo fingerprinted against a decade-old laptop whose clock had never learned to lie. I copied Claire. Attached the email where Callum called SystemSync your tool. Polite. Documented. A carpenter's pencil line. The next day brought something meaner. A calendar flood of one-on-ones appeared on my team's screens. Aiden meeting each person, not for handover, but evaluation. Priya's slot landed and vanished, then reappeared with a new title, role alignment. Marco texted after his. He asked if you made things more complicated than they need to be. Phishing. I stared a long time at that message. Fashion loves simplicity. Safety loves memory. I wrote back. Thank you. Keep your notes. Breathe. On my way out, I walked the production floor. The lines kept their practiced grace, metal moving like a taut river. A supervisor nodded at me, the small contract I'd come to trust more than any document. 6 weeks. The promise had already shrunk in the wash. I could feel the timeline being folded smaller. That's the thing about direction. Once chosen, it wants speed. I checked the envelope in my coat for Priya. Checked the backups. Checked my pulse. All steady. The betrayal didn't announce itself with fanfare. It slipped into my personal inbox on a Thursday night. Subject line spun to sound routine. Clarification on new licensing terms. A supplier we'd worked with for years. Good people who ship on time and send holiday cards with their children's actual names. Was excited about Riverton's plan to transition our custom integrations to a third-party platform. They wanted to confirm that my team would assist with the cutover. I read it twice, then a third time, tasting the word third like a metal coin. We didn't have a plan to transition anything. The attached PDF had a logo I didn't recognize and a signature I did, Callum's. I scrolled to the footnotes and found a platitude dressed as progress. Vendor consolidation ensures scalability. What it ensured was that the glue I'd written, the quiet edge adapter SystemSync used to marry old controllers to new data, would be stripped out and replaced by someone's classmate's startup. I could see Aiden's outline beneath the paragraph breaks. The bright confidence of men who've only ever had the stairs light up as they walked. I forwarded the email to myself again, to an address I use like a shoebox under a bed, then called Jonah. We hadn't talked in months. He picked up on the second ring and said my name in that careful way friends do when they're already clearing their table. I gave him the short version. He gave me a time and a diner off the highway with coffee that tastes like persistence. He arrived in a jacket that could lose a fight with January and win anyway, slid into the booth and listened. Legally, you're on rough gravel, he said, straight up. Your employment agreement will say the things employment agreements say, but there's noise in your story that doesn't match the timing. He tapped the folded PDF. Why push you out now, midstream, if the numbers are good? I don't know, I said, and it felt dangerous to admit that. Give me 48 hours, he said. I won't touch anything that pings. Just public fields. Sometimes truth falls out of the pockets. He called sooner. You should see this, Jonas said, his voice gone small with the size of it. He sent a packet that could bend a desk. SEC filings. Analyst notes. A draft merger deck living in a public cached link for 9 careless hours. Tech core industries leaning hard into the Midwest, shopping for operationally mature assets. Riverton starred. The deal, late stage, contingent on 2 phrases that landed like nails: modernized technical infrastructure and transitional leadership. Transitional leadership, I repeated, the way you repeat a diagnosis before it becomes your life. So the runway had to look clean. Cleaner than true, Jonas said. And look here. He highlighted a valuation driver. Proprietary manufacturing management interface reduces downtime variance across legacy equipment clusters. That's SystemSync with a tuxedo and a haircut. The math used my work to raise their price tag. The direction they chose needed my map. There was more. Martin had quietly reduced his position last quarter. Callum and select executives had agreements tucked into the transaction. Retention bonuses that rhyme with parachutes. And then the emails Jonah found by way of public records and an employee's too honest calendar. Talk of my replacement half a year earlier. Interviews scheduled the week I slept on a server room floor babysitting a breach that didn't make the news because we didn't let it. I drove to the old industrial park where SystemSync began as a dare to myself. Parked beside a warehouse with windows like tired eyes and watched the dawn not hurry. I could see my younger hands in that empty space. Cheap coffee, a secondhand laptop, the stubborn joy of making old metal learn a new language. I remembered the first time the adapter handshake worked without stutter, and I laughed in a room no one had to clean up after me. Back home, I pulled a battered external drive from a drawer that still smelled like sawdust. Plugged it in, waited for the little light to blink awake. There it was, the original SystemSync trunk, file stamped in a time before Riverton learned my name. Notes to self that read like field prayers. And emails. Callum's your tool message. His will formalize once the dust settles promise. The dust that never settled because some men build their careers out of other people's storms. I printed the emails and placed them under a paperweight shaped like a gear. Then I stood at the sink with the water running, not washing anything, just letting the sound be louder than my thoughts. They were selling a future using my past. Aiden was already drawing slides on top of years. Callum was putting on a suit that made betrayal look like weather. Somewhere a night shift supervisor was pouring coffee into a thermos and trusting the system to hold. Fine, I thought. Let's make the boundary visible. I took the morning off from being reasonable. Printed what mattered and laid it out on the kitchen table like tools before a job. The pre-Riverton SystemSync trunk, commit history stamped with the dust and coffee of another life. Callum's email that named it your tool. The early integration proposal where I used the word license like a fence post. I photographed each page with timestamps that don't blink. Then I did what calms me most. I labeled things. Folders with names that made sense to me 10 years ago and again now. Handshake, adapters, failover speech, the private grammar of a system that learned to take care of itself. By noon, my badge still opened doors. I used it to walk into a meeting where they tried to shorten time. Callum sat at the head, Claire to his right, Aiden angled like a page boy in a portrait. We're accelerating the transition, Callum said, voice softened by a practiced frown. Your last day will be next Friday. 2 weeks. The 6 had been ceremonial. It turns out, the orchestra was already packing up while the song played. Any reason? I asked, curious the way you are about whether that's already raining. Fit, Claire said, the syllable a cushion, and the need for clarity. Aiden added something about momentum. I nodded like a metronome. Understood, I said. Before then, we should finalize SystemSync's licensing terms. Have you reviewed the original carve-out? Callum's eyes shuddered a fraction, the microsecond where truth changes shoes. Our legal team believes integrated systems are company property, he said. We're offering a separation package that's generous. Generous is another word that tries too hard. I'll have my lawyer review it, I replied. Calm as a closed door. There's power in letting someone see you write down the time and place where they move the goalposts. That evening, the parking lot staged our quiet heist of integrity. Marco slid into the passenger seat with the posture of a man who's practiced not being seen. He set a small, plain flash drive on the console. Everything you asked for, he said. Original code bases that crossed your desk alone. Deployment logs where your keys signed the builds. Hashes. Clean. He looked at me like he wanted permission to forgive himself. Why? I asked softly. He didn't blink. Because they think we're all replaceable, he said. The truth makes better vows than anger. Back home, I made tea and opened a calendar to the next 10 days. Instead of panic, I treated it like a release schedule. Day 1, notarize the repos. Day 2, consult patent attorneys. I booked 3, back-to-back, choosing people who wore sensible shoes and asked rude, necessary questions. We filed provisional patents on the adapters, the timing logic that lets legacy controllers hear modern telemetry without stutter, the verification handshake that refuses to lie under load. Not the whole cathedral, just the keystones. Enough to tell any future room where the weight truly rests. Day 3, spin up a secure offsite. Jonah lent me a sliver of his cloud, a quiet room with heavy walls. I mirrored the originals there, layered encryption like winter coats, wrote audits that email me even when I don't want to be found. I set up read-only demos that prove function without exposing guts. Museum glass for people who only understand value when it's lit. Day 4, plan B for when the week gets honest. I assembled a sealed envelope for Priya, labeled with a date and a single instruction. Inside, a letter explaining the boundary, a copy of the clause Callum pretended not to remember, a list of the 3 places the line must never be crossed if the factory is to stay kind to human bodies. I added a note in my smallest handwriting. If they make you choose between truth and belonging, choose truth. Belonging built on pretending costs more later. The acceleration, oddly, steadied me. When people show you hurry, they reveal fear. Not of me. I'm just a man with a laptop and a stubborn streak, but of the idea that work has authors and authors have rights. I packed my office with care, leaving the tools anyone would need to keep families fed. I took my notebooks home, not because they were explosive, but because they had my handwriting in the margins, the part of work that carries your face. On day 5, I stood in the server room again, let the air comb my thoughts, touched the edge of a cabinet, and felt the little scar on my knuckle from a rack year in year 2. We keep records in our bodies, too. Clean lines, I said aloud to no one. No slashing, no smoke. There's a way to leave that isn't a fire. There's a way to say, here is what I built before you. Here is what I built for you. And here is where those 2 roads diverge without anyone falling into a ditch. I turned off the light, let the door seal. The fans kept singing. Boundaries set. Receipts stacked. Next, the signature that would make the line visible to anyone pretending not to see it. TechCore wrote to my personal inbox at 6:11 a.m., a polite paragraph that smelled like due diligence and hedging. We've heard you may be transitioning, it said, and would value a conversation about your expertise. I forwarded it to my lawyer with a single line, after departure, and made coffee like a man watering a plant he intends to repot. There's a calm that comes when cause and effect finally take a seat in the same room. That night, I put on my careful hands and touched SystemSync the way you touch a family heirloom. Respect first, then repair. I added a digital signature check to the core, a quiet handshake that asked a simple question. Are you the code we shipped, unaltered and honest? If yes, proceed. If not, alert, but don't burn. I wrote an expiring license keyed to dates, not grudges. 8 days after my exit, the system would pause for a conversation. No wipes, no traps, no spikes, just a credentialed request to renew the agreement we'd always pretended would write itself. A clean line is stronger than a dramatic one. It invites adults to the table. I documented the change as if a stranger would review it, because some stranger will. Notes in the commit, intent, scope, tests. A paragraph that explained why expiry at peak load would surface fast. If you want a truth to be found, put it where the light already is. I could have made it obscure, tucked it in a subroutine with a name that means nothing. Instead, I wrote in plain language and pushed the build with the same care I used in storms. Unit tests first, staging next, production last, and signed. Aiden pulled me into his office the next morning, as if my quiet had a sound. Some of the team says you've been off, he began, searching for a gentle synonym. Anything I should know? I'm wrapping up, I said, finishing documentation, leaving the place better than I found it. All true. He nodded, then announced they'd change all passwords after my departure. Standard procedure. Good practice, I said, resisting the urge to tell him that integrity doesn't live in passwords. It lives in processes and the people who learn to trust one another. He tried out a smile like a blazer, then dismissed me with a meeting to prepare for. As I walked out, Callum passed me in the hall and managed a nod. 11 years translated into that thin tilt of his head. I tucked it into a pocket already full of such gestures and kept walking. On my last day, the HR script moved efficiently. Badge, laptop, forms. Claire slid a pen across the table with a look that almost reached the corners of her eyes. I signed the exit paperwork and declined the cater tray lunch Aiden arranged. I don't do sheet cake goodbyes. I shook Priya's hand a shade longer than professional and said, "Open the envelope if the week gets honest." She glanced at the date, then at me, and nodded once. Marco hugged me the way men do when the world keeps watching, brief, decisive, generous. At home, the quiet felt new. I put my box of desk things on the table and let them be not quite mine yet. Then I opened my laptop and wrote one email to myself. Verification sequence alpha, 7 complete. It was just a string of words, but it closed something inside me with a clean click. Friday night, I slept like a room with fresh paint. On Saturday, I bought groceries and a cheap plant that looked like it wanted to try. On Sunday, I walked along the lake and let my steps keep time for thoughts that finally stopped sprinting. I had done what I said I would do. Protect what feeds families, protect what I built before those families ever knew my name, and leave evidence for anyone who confuses kindness with surrender. The countdown began without ceremony. Systems don't perform, they execute. Somewhere in a rack I once cut my knuckle on, a clock started telling the truth. Monday began like muscle memory. Coffee, headlines, the old habit of checking alerts I no longer owned. At 9:17 a.m., right when the production floor usually climbs to its practiced peak, my phone lit with messages I didn't need to open to understand. License expired. Please contact the developer to renew. A sentence written without malice, only boundary. By 9:20, line 1 slowed to a careful stop. By 9:45, 3 facilities exhaled in unison, the way bodies do when they are told to sit for a moment and reconsider. Callum called at 10:30 with a voice that tried to sound taller. "What the hell did you do?" Panic makes people forget their adjectives. "I did what the agreement always allowed," I said. "The SystemSync license expired. Clause 7, if you're standing near a file cabinet. I've sent a renewal that recognizes authorship and compensates use. Nothing breaks." It pauses. We can unpause together. Silence. Then the sound of someone covering a handset to practice a calmer version of himself. "Send it to legal," he said, softer. "Already did." Priya texted at 10:41. "We're safe." Controlled halt. "No one hurt." "Open the envelope." "Thank you." I pictured her steady hands triaging logistics instead of fear, telling the floor what would happen next in verbs, not drama. The day took on the tempo of paperwork. By 3 p.m., their counsel had inventoried my receipts and stopped arguing with timestamps. By 5 p.m., signatures traveled through fiber, ritual remade into renewal, recognition of my ownership of the pre-Riverton core, a proper license fee, and a non-disclosure that spared everyone the indignity of public theater. The line spun up. Steele remembered its choreography. Night shift lunches could be reheated and eaten on time. 3 days later, TechCore's VP of Operations slid a contract across a clean table downtown. "We're moving forward with the acquisition," he said. "We'd like you to lead the integration as a consultant, autonomy preserved, scope defined by you. Twice the pay, half the meetings, travel optional." I asked about governance and veto power where safety was concerned. He said yes without bargaining. "And Aiden?" I asked, neutral. The VP's mouth flickered. "Transitioning to other opportunities. Corporations use passive voice to pad the floor. The truth arrives anyway. 3 major clients had threatened to walk during the outage rehearsal. Confidence hates uncertainty dressed as innovation." Word filtered back through friendly ducks. Priya joined me 2 months later, bringing order and a list of questions that sharpened our work. Marco followed after his daughter's recital, saying yes between applause. Little by little, half the team found its way to my porch. Contractors, not subordinates. People who understood that expertise and humility aren't opposites, they're partners. We built a small firm that answers its own phone. I bought a cabin up the lake with the first check, a place where pines keep old weather and the deck remembers sunsets. On mornings when fog drapes the water like a shawl, I open my laptop and talk to machines the way I always have, clearly, with respect. At noon, I close it and practice the hard art of not rescuing problems I no longer own. A year after the white tablecloth, I saw Callum in a downtown restaurant. He started to turn away, then squared his shoulders and walked over. The suit had softened, the eyes, too. "You won," he said. "No edge, just the fact laid down between us." I looked at him the way you look at a bridge you've already crossed. "It wasn't about winning," I said, and this time it wasn't a posture. It was about value, about boundaries, about leaving things working. He nodded once. We parted like coworkers at a stoplight. At the cabin, I sit sometimes with the lake going glassy and think about systems, how they are families of choices, how they inherit our ethics, how the good ones outlast our names. In Milwaukee, machines keep moving because people do. The floor still sends its quiet contracts into the parking lot at dawn. And I keep my pencil lines honest. Protect what feeds families. Protect what you built before anyone knew your name. And when it's time to leave, leave the lights on.